Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are about to join in on item 6 for info sheet number 2 for the SB 673 track 2 info sheet. It is 1:58, and we have a quorum. All members are. Yeah, all members. She is present. She's right. Yeah, she is present. We have all members present. We maintain a quorum. Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. And
Is it on? Okay. Thank you, Chair Rizzo. And I just wanted to say, hearing about your departure, you always bring such a positive and happy energy to these meetings. So whoever becomes chair has really large shoes to fill. Yes, happy and positive. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And difficult. So it's good for us to be together collectively in a positive way to try to solve some of them. We're all in the same team. We all want the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So show us how you're going to do.
All right.
All right.
All right. Well, good afternoon, esteemed board members, and a fond hello to our community members and stakeholders, both in the room and online. Today's presentation focuses on DTSC's proposed framework to address community vulnerability in the permitting process. So Senate Bill 673 required DTSC to consider adopting new hazardous waste permit criteria in California regulations and to implement programmatic reforms. DTSC responded to SB 673 in 2 tracks. So track 1 was completed in 2019, and it included regulations for a violation scoring procedure, health risk assessment, facility training plans, and enhanced financial assurance. And track 2 generally pertains to issues of community vulnerability and setback distance, and is the focus of today's presentation. So for track 2, DTSC created a revised framework that addresses and incorporates the public comments that we've received up to date. This revised framework identified 3 goals. Sorry, I didn't realize I was the flipper. Oh, sorry, other, yep. Okay. No. Okay, there we are. The framework and the revised framework identifies 3 goals, which are summarized in this slide that you see here. This framework and the feedback that we receive on it is going to help guide and inform us on the draft regulatory package that we plan to roll out in the coming year. And today's presentation focuses on goal 2, which is to consider community vulnerability in our permit decisions and conditions. So we have been releasing this revised conceptual framework in the form of informational sheets to help inform the communities, stakeholders, and facilities of what we plan to include in the rollout of the Track 2 regulatory package. So the framework is conceptual. It's to get feedback so that we can incorporate that into the draft regulatory package that we will put together. So we hope to receive ongoing feedback as we release each info sheet. Info sheet number 1 focused on early community engagement, and it was released on August 5th of this year. Info sheet 2 focuses on community vulnerability and was released on October 28th. And info sheet number 3 is in progress and will focus on setback distance. So as I said before, we hope to receive continued feedback as we release each of these. Info sheet 1 was released in August of this year. This slide shows a summary of statistics to show our outreach and engagement activities with info sheet 1, and that included sending info sheet out via email, outreach to media, tribes, and legislative staff, and promotion on social media. We continue to encourage stakeholders from both the public and industry to submit comments via email, survey, or submit verbal or written comments at these board meetings. So now let's jump into the details of info sheet 3. The first page of info sheet 2. The first page of info sheet 2 is shown here, and the full document can be accessed by this QR code on the slide, or by conducting a search for DTSC's SB 673 webpage online. In the presentation today, I will break down InfoSheet 2 into its parts to help describe how we plan to incorporate community vulnerability into our permit decision process. So community vulnerability describes how a population is at risk of negative impacts from factors that include but are not limited to public health, socioeconomics, and environmental pollution burdens. DTSC recognizes that communities across California are adversely impacted by issues such as inequities in public health, socioeconomic disparities, and environmental pollution burdens. In InfoSheet 2, we are proposing a framework that seeks to use standardized criteria to identify those disadvantaged communities so that a permit applicant and DTSC can assess if the facility's hazardous waste operations may impact existing vulnerabilities or create new ones. So what you see here on this slide is a flowchart that illustrates what DTSC is proposing. When a facility wishes to apply for a new permit or a permit renewal or wishes to modify a permit, they would have to take these extra steps. The pink box at the top represents what we proposed in InfoSheet 1 for the facility to complete early community engagement and incorporate the feedback they receive into their permit application. The first green box in the middle there represents the first change we are proposing in InfoSheet 2. So as part of their permit application that they submit, the facility would need to complete a community vulnerability profile. This would determine if their facility is located in a disadvantaged community. We anticipate that this would be a brief, standardized worksheet created by DTSC and filled out by the facility. This would help ensure consistency in the process and expectations. So if a community vulnerability profile determines that an applicant's facility is located in a disadvantaged community, then they would need to draft and submit a community vulnerability assessment, which is seen here in that second green box. The assessment would be much more comprehensive, and it would evaluate how the facility's permitted operations might impact the surrounding community, and it is intended to capture the uniqueness of each facility and the uniqueness of each community. As shown in the last slide, one of the main objectives of the community vulnerability profile would be to determine if the facility is located in a disadvantaged community and to identify the criteria that is driving that designation. So for this, DTSC is proposing to use the 2022 Cal EPA final designation of disadvantaged communities as the basis for identifying which communities are disadvantaged. Additionally, this profile would serve as the location where all of the pre-application community input is summarized and discussed. DTSC is proposing that it would also summarize other sources of pollution in the community to show which environmental burdens are present in the community. These sources could include other contaminated properties, other hazardous waste facilities, large quantity generators of hazardous waste, or major transportation corridors. Lastly, it's important to note that this community vulnerability profile would be publicly available while the permit application is under review. So the community and the stakeholders would be able to see it and follow along in the process. The Cal EPA 2022 final designation of disadvantaged communities relies mostly on scoring from the Cal EnviroScreen tool to determine which communities can be characterized as disadvantaged. For the applicants completing the community vulnerability profile, this is what will determine if they have to take the additional step of completing and submitting an assessment, a community vulnerability assessment in their permit application. Cal EnviroScreen is a publicly available mapping tool developed by the Cal EPA Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA, to help identify vulnerable communities that are burdened by pollution from multiple sources. The current version of Callan Virus Screen includes 21 indicators of community vulnerability and cumulative community impact for each of the 8,000 census tracts in California. Examples of these indicators are shown here, and they include ambient air quality, cardiovascular disease, diesel particulate matter, and unemployment, among others. So that being said, we recognize that Callan Virus Screen provides insight at the census tract level, and it doesn't always capture the full picture. So what we're proposing is for DTSC to seek what DTS seeking is to increase the pre-application public input so that a community's concerns, their suggestions, and their lived experiences can be considered in the development and review of the permit application. So it will be considered by the applicant and by DTSC when we receive the application. The goal of this is to daylight community concerns upfront in the process and allow the public to better track how these concerns are being addressed throughout the permitting process. The last proposed core element of the community vulnerability profile is a summary of other pollution sources in the community. This could include the surrounding regional air quality, where major transportation corridors exist, and other local pollution sources, such as other industrial facilities. The draft regulations that we will create will provide further detail to define the scope of this element. Now back to that flow chart. So we just discussed the detail of the first green box, the community vulnerability profile. And like I said before, if that profile indicates that the facility is in a disadvantaged community, then there's an additional requirement placed on the applicant. They will have to complete the second green box, which is the community vulnerability assessment. As opposed to being a worksheet that they complete, this assessment would be much more involved and would take the form of a detailed report drafted for public audience. And this assessment would also be available to the public during the application review. So DTSC intends for the assessment to serve as an essential permit application document. It's going to be submitted with the application, and it will be written for a public audience and around which the permit applicant, the community, and DTSC would focus discussion on community vulnerabilities, community lived experiences, and meaningful strategies to address community issues related to facility operations. DTSC permitting staff and subject matter experts will thoroughly review this detailed assessment to ensure that it is accurate, that it is thoughtful, and that it is effective in addressing community issues related to facility operations. DTSC will use this information to consider opportunities for collaboration across different state, federal, and local agencies to help address complex vulnerability issues. And more importantly, the community vulnerability assessment would be used to determine if there's a need to change which units in the facility are permitted, if special conditions need to be incorporated into the permit, or if a permit denial is deemed necessary. The community vulnerability assessment would include some of the following elements. So some are listed here. A summary and discussion of the Callan Virus Screen indicator scores for the community, a full summary of the facility's environmental monitoring programs to describe what measures and things they have in place to detect and respond to releases from the facility, a summary of the results from the human health risk assessment to communicate impacts on sensitive receptors in the community, a discussion of the community's pre-application input and how it was incorporated into the permit application and how they design their operations, and a history of any documented hazardous releases from the facility. We anticipate that DTSC would prepare a guidance document to make sure that applicants and the public have a clear understanding of what DTSC expects to be included in this assessment and how we plan to review it. So how will this framework be used by DTSC? The community outreach information will inform our efforts to address community concerns, And the community vulnerability information, both the profile and the assessment, would be used to inform DTSC decisions and the development of special permit conditions imposed on the facility to provide further protections. The community vulnerability profiles and assessment documents will be submitted as part of the permit application. This means that they are subject to DTSC's full review by permitting staff and subject matter experts from the fields of toxicology, engineering, geology, communication, and environmental equity. These community vulnerability documents would be equally important as the other permit application materials, and the content of the assessment would help DTSC to apply its existing authority to deny or condition permits in a more informed manner. So how does this proposed framework help benefit the community? This would create a clear mechanism to ensure that community vulnerability is considered and discussed in the permit application. It would require the applicant to seek out community input before submitting an application, and it would require that all input is documented in the application materials along with how they're using that information to change their operations. This framework will help foster a common understanding about community vulnerabilities between a community, a permit applicant, and DTSC. And how does this proposed framework benefit permit applicants? So this would give permit applicants an opportunity to engage with the community at the beginning of the permit application process and build a better relationship with their neighboring communities. The proposed regulatory framework would provide consistency in permit applications for purposes of these two assessments and profiles, and it would clarify requirements and expectations so that the applicants would fully understand what's being expected of them. So we talked all about info sheet 2 and what comes next? DTSC is in the process of developing the revised framework to address facility setback distance, and we hope to release that in early 2025 in the form of info sheet 3. After soliciting input on all of the information sheets, DTSC plans to move in the development of the draft rulemaking package. And in the rulemaking process, there's going to be a minimum 45-day public comment period where we will accept comments and input on the draft regulations and rulemaking package. And after considering all of those comments and incorporating what we feel is necessary, we will adopt final regulations. So I want to leave with this. The most important thing for us is to get all of your feedback from the board, the communities, the stakeholders, and the industry on these info sheets, on these concepts to help inform us when we develop the draft regulations. So please consider filling out our surveys and providing comments by email. And if you have any questions for all of those folks calling in, you can always contact me or the SB 673 team here. And there's a QR code there where you can scan it to contact that team. So thank you for your time.
Wow, thank you. I'm sure that questions abound. I can see the looks on everyone's face. So now we have more stringent future setbacks, and now you have existing facilities who don't have that setback, they don't have that, and they're coming for a permit renewal. And so part of what this is saying is you have to meet it. We can't exempt that. Is that correct? You're not looking at exempting existing facilities who might not be able to meet your new standard.
No, so if they were to apply for a renewal or a modification, they would have to go through this.
Or even a temporary authorization, anything.
Yeah, or a permit modification.
They'd have to meet all those new standards. So there are probably, I know one facility that doesn't have the setback that we all think they should have, and there they would be. They would have to recreate their footprint in order to comply. No? Setbacks? No?
Yeah. Well,
Setback is a different one.
Okay.
yeah, so the setback distance will come out in info sheet 3. This is more about what defining better the community that surrounds the facility,
Right.
gaining a better understanding, and then assessing if the facility is contributing to any of those vulnerabilities. And if they are, what things they need to put in place. And if they can't, then potential denial.
Okay. The next one includes the setbacks,
Yes.
which could create that conflict down the line.
But that's for new facilities.
That's for just new facilities?
We haven't fine-tuned that yet.
Okay,
More to
that's
come.
what I'm
Info
asking.
sheet 3.
Okay. And so you're not talking about changes to Enviro screens so much as as this set of standards that runs parallel with Enviro screen.
Yeah, we would use the EnviroScreen data
To inform it.
to
Got
help determine which facilities are disadvantaged or which facilities lay next to or in disadvantaged
Got it.
communities.
That's helpful, thank you. Board questions? Sushma?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I have 2 questions.
Do you have the mic close to you?
Yes,
Okay,
right here.
very good.
Thank you for this. Really happy to see the progress.
Mhm.
My first question is about enforcement on the quality of the assessments you receive from facilities. How do you ensure and how do you incentivize that facilities to provide comprehensive and complete assessment data to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this assessment or profile will be part of the permit application, and the way we review all of the components of the permit application, we look at it with the fine-tooth comb, with subject matter experts chiming in. And if let's say they submit an assessment and we feel that it has deficiencies, we would include that in our notice of deficiency process, and they should be responsive to that. If they are not being responsive to that, then we would take adverse action. So very similar to how we would respond to, let's say, a seismic report. So we're not going to just take their word for it. We're not going to just accept whatever they send to us. It's not a check the box process. It has to be meaningful, effective, thoughtful. And we have our experts looking in to make sure that that's happening.
Okay. So if I were to play this back, you expect that the community assessment review is running in parallel with the permit application review itself.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then how do you envision any timeline implications? Because you're adding an extra step in the process. And in our past conversations, we've heard about how we're trying to minimize continued permits. So can you speak a little bit about how you intend to ensure that you're able to deliver this extra step within the same timeline guardrails?
With fewer people.
With fewer people.
Yeah, that's a great question, and a question that Alexis had also brought up too. So it's going to be very important for us when we draft these, the reg package, that's for telling the facility what they must do. Also, what we will be working on are internal processes and procedures and standard work processes to create how we will be responding to them. And so it's important for us to create, as we receive these assessments, what are going to be, maybe even create like a checklist, or what are the things that we're looking for, who's going to have to review this. And so we're going to have to take a look and see how we're going to address this. We don't want this to add time to our process, and we'll have to take it back to see how we can make sure that that doesn't happen. And there's some creative ways that we've thought about, but still in the works.
So this brings me back to my first point, which is about ensuring that you receive high quality assessments so that you minimize the work on DTSC's part to evaluate and then do this back and forth with the facility. So I wonder if there's more you can do to ensure and incentivize that the first assessment you get is really solid so that you are investing less time.
Yeah,
that's a great fines question. Or other mechanisms you can consider.
So we've done like a light version of this for the Kettleman Hills landfill decision. We did a EnviroScreen report. So we kind of have that to start off with. That's not necessarily what it will look like, but that was like, dipping our toe into the water. That's one thing. The other piece is that we have a pre-application meeting with the applicants well before they submit their applications. And that's when we would share with them the guidance documents, and here's what our expectations of, and here are the components and elements of these documents that we expect to be complete in order for you to be successful. So we're hoping that all of that upfront engagement will help ensure that we get a quality application and a quality assessment and profile.
So my invitation is for you to evaluate whether it makes sense to build more teeth into the process. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Okay, I think Georgette, you had a question?
Yeah, I have a I have two questions perhaps. One is if we can pull up slide 7, I was a little bit confused, or at least I want to see if you can walk me through it.
Sure,
Um,
I would be happy to. But
okay.
I can't bring up the slide.
No.
We're working
No, I
on that
have it.
right now to bring that back up.
Are we bringing it up back?
Yeah, I'm gonna work to bring it back
So
up.
basically my question is, after the assessment, it goes into either the no or the yes.
After the profile, the
The
profile
profile,
is like.
I'm sorry, yeah, profile. It goes to no and then yes.
Mhm.
What makes it, what are the determinants?
Mhm. So the profile
that part.
determines if the community that the facility is in or next to is a disadvantaged community based on majority of the Cal Virus Screen data. If
Mhm.
it is a disadvantaged community, then they have to do that full hefty assessment. If it's not, and then they're in this perfect location where everything's good, they carry on and move forward.
So they go into the yes.
They go into the yes, which means they don't have to complete the assessment.
Got it. Okay. So that's not determining if it moves forward for, okay, I got it now.
It doesn't determine if they'll get a permit.
Okay, so then continue with permit process,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other one is assessment.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
And the assessment is going to be much heftier than the profile.
Yeah. If I understood you, or maybe I heard you, I heard wrongly. This, no, it's the assessment. The assessment, which is comprehensive, right, based on the Cal Enviro.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The assessment is not determining if that particular industry is harming the impacted community.
It will. It will assess if the facility operations are impacting any of those vulnerabilities that were identified.
So how do they do that? Because I think this is the rub, right? Where it's, how do you, air is polluted.
Mm-hmm.
How does one assessing, then this is where the pushback from the community is, because sometimes it's put on the community, well, you have to show that that particular entity is the entity harming.
Mm-hmm.
How does that entity that we're opposed and we're telling them, now you have to prove that you're not?
Mm-hmm.
How do they do that?
Well,
what technology
it would
is
be on
there out
them
there?
to showcase that, whether they showcase how their operations work, how their equipment works, if they have emission control equipment alongside their units, and they usually have monitoring that they do. And then if we assess that that doesn't exist, then that might be a permit condition that we impose on them and say, you know what, you have to increase your monitoring and you have to submit these reports to us, and then that'll help determine. And at any point, we can say like, okay, this is, you know, even outside of this, if we get information that there's releases, we can impose additional conditions on the facilities to make them more protective.
Okay.
So part of this assessment will be looking at that and then determining, here's how we know that we're not contributing to that vulnerability. And we do a check to see, does that make sense? Or are they really not able to determine that? And you need to add more monitoring equipment in order to be better able to determine that.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a permit condition that we would impose on them
Mm-hmm.
for increased protection.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So from the community lens, though, if they're saying enough is enough,
Mm-hmm.
how do they push back? Like, putting conditions is good, but not for the community. It's good for the industry because they're going to be allowed to continue within certain barriers.
Conditions are good for the community because there are things that we impose on them, kind of like make the facility take these extra measures to be more protective, so that's to better protect the communities. Info sheet 1 talked about that early community engagement because we recognize Cal Virus Screen is not the end all of what exists. That's where that early engagement, where communities will chime in and say, hey, here's the issues that we have, here are the concerns that we have, here's what we've been noticing. You know, I walked by and there was this thing that I noticed, or so-and-so said that. And that information is what the applicant will have to address and respond to, and what that we will review also. Okay. So that's part of it. We want the community to be able to share their lived experience
Mhm.
and not just use Callan virus screen data and that's the end of it. We want to hear from the communities, and we want to have the communities' voices help inform this review process and the final determination and decision.
Mhm. Okay. My other question is, and I still have a lot of questions about that, but I'll let it go now. My other question is, on the next steps, you laid out several processes,
Mhm.
but there's no timeline to it.
Yes.
Can you tell us when are we expecting to adopt these regulations?
So it takes the draft rulemaking package can take a full year. And so our goal is to have it drafted in 2025. And I would say sometime in 2026, we're hoping to be able to implement this. But, of course, other things come into play. But that's our goal.
Okay. I hope that perhaps we can have a more firmer timeline, just because this has been something in the works for quite a while.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting to that point. At least I'm getting to that point where I would want us to be more firmer.
Yeah, fully understand. And like Serlene said, when she said we're closer to the finish line than we've ever been before, we're actually getting really close to it. The draft rulemaking is a great step to be at. That's like getting very close to the finish line.
Yeah. Yes, and this is great when we're talking about it, which is great. But I think if we put a date, it would even get us closer to something.
Sure, I'll work with the team, and when we do our info sheet 3 presentation, we'll try to see if we can put a date or a small date range.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's good.
I have a question, and then maybe more for the board. Oh, question for you as well. So, will there be I know you have the surveys. I know you're probably receiving comments as well. In terms of just process, will there be updated information sheets, or how will you incorporate the suggestions or comments received? Is it just going to be in the draft reg that happened, or is there going to be another round of this?
We don't plan to have another round of info sheets. We plan to incorporate all of those comments into the draft regulation, but those also will be open for public comment. So,
okay, so then there'll be other round.
Yeah, all these great questions that you guys ask us are really helpful because it makes sure that we're thinking about all of it as we're putting together those draft regulations, as well as our internal documents, our internal guidance documents. So, all your comments are very, very helpful in that.
And then the other thing, I know I really do appreciate the opportunity as one of the subcommittee members to meet with you and your team. I just wanted to say, kind of like the big picture for me, kind of comment that I've had on this particular information sheet is the lack of clarity on how DTSC will be using the information gleaned from the assessment. I think you've put a lot of thought in terms of what the information is, that you'll be looking at in terms of your analysis, but it's not clear yet from the information sheet on what your analysis is. And I know in the information sheet, and kind of to your point, Georgette, it does talk about, there is a process for like granting or denying the permit. And this, you said, will be kind of included in that overarching analysis. And so it does seem like this could be a basis for permit denial.
Absolutely.
But it's not clear like how DTSC will be doing that assessment. And I think, having more clarity for the regulated entities, for the communities, for all the stakeholders would be really useful if we could get a little bit more detail. And I understand like you might not want to have like a bright line rule, but even having more information on how DTSC will be assessing this information, I think would be very critical.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great comment.
I think that goes to a comment that I had, which is if there was an example of a facility and you walked through this whole process and demonstrated what would happen, what would be the decision points on a denial, on pushing back, on requiring something?
I can give you a very hypothetical.
Yeah.
Very hypothetical.
Yeah.
Let's say there's a facility and it's determined that there are emissions from their operations. And so we say, okay, if you really want to continue to operate, you have to like either enclose it or install this, dust collection
Sure.
system or something else. They refuse to do that, then we would deny and say, well, you're not being protective. You're not taking, you're not gonna add this extra thing that want to impose on you, then that could lead to denial.
Something as dramatic as a release, obviously, it would be easy for anyone to get that you shouldn't do that.
Mhm.
But I'm talking more those community vulnerability on a scale of X to Y, 1 to 10. Are you going to say, well, 1s and 2s are okay, but 7 and 8s are not? Like, what's the thing that makes you deny? Community vulnerability is a broad term and has a lot of elements in it. Are they scored the way, not that we like the scoring of EnviroScreen particularly, but is there a score for them or something that triggers, and that's clear to community? They got a 7, they're done. They either fix it or they're closed, or they got a 2, that's not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to let them go forward with minor mitigation. I'm imagining the other end of it, where you're the community group identifying this issue that sometimes is not just the DTSC, but there are other agencies or land use, or, I can imagine conflicts around some of that. So are there going to be definitive numbers that you can rely on and use to say, nope, this doesn't work? You either fix it or you're done.
So we don't have that yet.
But that is a goal.
Yeah. I don't know if the goal will end with a definitive number, because a lot of this stuff is site specific. Their operations are so unique, and where they're situated is so unique, and all of that stuff. So, but we are looking to how can we effectively use this assessment, having some sort of like things in place that these are the things that we're looking for, and these are the things that will raise red flags and say, okay, something has to be done.
So a red flag could trigger something. I think for the community trust and understanding of, that they are protected, that we are protected, you have to know what results in a denial and what would be, well, it's not so bad. And I think what we hear from them all the time is that's not so bad, goes through, as opposed to, the very dramatic things. I mean, we're dealing with, say, a Chiquita Canyon now. Pretty dramatic. I don't think anybody's questioning whatever you do with Chiquita Canyon, but other ones are they're not as crystal clear. So I just hope we can get as much clarity at the granular vulnerability level that allows for decisions. So.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Our team is taking notes. That's why I'm not taking notes, but we're capturing all of this stuff.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah.
We try.
Yeah.
Sushma?
I'm just excitedly adding on to Jeannie's point, which is ultimately, when I heard you say that you're going to hear the community voice and take into consideration, the flag that came up for me is there is a subjective component of the analysis. Mm-hmm. We would, to the extent possible, like to objectify it, and which means metrics and benchmarks. There might be some component that is still subjective.
Or Swati, it's metrics.
Yes.
Or Ingrid. If there are subjective elements, call out specifically what those subjective elements are, so that there's less kind of gray area, not just for the community, but also for the facility. Mm-hmm. No facility wants to feel like a community, because they're vocal, is simply getting DTSC to make a permit decision one way or the other.
Yeah, and this assessment will include a health risk assessment, and that will have a lot more of those details and quantifying things and running. I forgot what the word is, Jesse, when you're running an analysis of what it looks like on the health risk assessment. A model, yes, when you're modeling it.
Okay.
Yeah, when you're modeling, okay, this is how it's impacting, this is how the operations are running.
Alexis, did you have something? And then we'll go to public comment.
I appreciate working with you and your team. I feel like Ingrid and I and the other parts of the BES staff really feel that it's a very positive and helpful engagement.
Likewise.
A couple of things that come to mind are, in some of the facilities that we've visited with DTSC, you can hear the community frustration about a facility, and the source of that frustration may not be that facility.
Mhm.
You may be in a fairly concentrated industrial land use area.
Mhm.
There may be odors. The odors may not come from that facility, but that may be the community's lived experience. And I think going back to what Sushma was saying about subjectivity and objectivity, something I brought up, we need to find a way through that maze. There may be air district permits, and facilities may be in compliance with those permits as fixed sources, and yet the mobile sources may drive non-attainment for that whole area
Mhm.
and for Cal EnviroScreen. And so I think we just have to navigate carefully as you begin to develop your regs, how one separates out what are issues regulated by Cal EPA agencies and facilities are in compliance with those, and to not have that become a community expectation that somehow you're going to do something else because you think it's from there. So it's a delicate thing that is very, as you know, facility specific. And
Yeah.
we look forward to working with you through the rest of this.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Alexis has a way of representing what we're all thinking
Yeah.
collectively. Thank you very much for that. Any other board? Let's go to public.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will now open the floor for public comment for this agenda item number 6, the SB 673 Track 2 Informational Sheet number 2. We're going to start with our in-person participants. Please raise your hand if you would like to come up to the podium and make a public comment. Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and check in with our Zoom participants. For our Zoom participants, please raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone if you would like to make a public comment for this agenda item. Not seeing any Spanish interpreters. Would you mind checking to ensure there are no public commenters in the Spanish room? Perfect. Thank you so much, Leticia. So that actually concludes our public comment segment for agenda item number 6, the SB 673 Track 2 Informational Sheet 2.
Thank you so much. That was great. We're ahead of schedule. And now instead of 25 minutes, you can have 30 minutes for lunch. Go for it. See you back here in 30.